Lacey City Council meeting on May 28th, 2020. And we'll go into the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, here we go again. We're having another city council meeting, and it's remote attendance, as everyone can see. We have an agenda, and I would like to get a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda items.
Move to approve the agenda and consent agenda.
I second it.
Is moved and second to approve the agenda and consent agenda items. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? That motion carries when we have an agenda. And as we've been doing for the last several online remote attendance meetings, we have the ability for the public to write in any questions for public comments. As of noon today, we did not receive any public comments to publiccomment@ci.lacey.law.us. And so first up on our agenda is under the resolutions. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave Schneider to talk about resolution 1090, the extension of emergency declaration relating to COVID-19. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening or good afternoon, Mayor, council members. So before you on this first agenda item is a resolution proposing an extension of the ongoing emergency. So as council's aware, council passed resolution 1085 on March 19th. Now that resolution confirmed the COVID-19, confirmed that COVID-19 constituted an emergency, and it found the mayor had previously declared that, and that was the resolution that confirmed that. On April 23rd, council passed a second resolution extending that emergency. Now that extension goes through today. So due to the significance of the ongoing pandemic and the potential for ongoing resources to be used in response, it's the staff's recommendation that the provisions of resolution 1085 be further extended. Now before you is a resolution 1090 that does just that. It extends the emergency through June 25th, which is the last council meeting that this council will have in June. If passed, council at that time would need to consider whether it needs to be further extended. So the recommendation is for council to approve resolution 1090, extending resolution 1085, which declared the emergency.
Can I get a motion?
I move that we approve 1090, extending the emergency declaration through June 25th.
Second.
Moved in second. Discussion. Well, Councilmember Cox.
A question for Dave. What's the logic behind extending it for just 1 month? I think we're probably going to be in a state of emergency for quite some time.
Thank you, Councilmember Cox. Well, the logic is that perhaps it's what we did previously. It gives a council an ongoing opportunity to review it. It's not difficult for me to prepare additional resolutions. Conversely, council could entertain language proposing that the emergency would stay in effect during the period of emergency as declared by the governor, or until council decides to rescind it. That would be an alternate. That language like that would preclude the need for council to continually readdress this unless council chose to rescind it prior to the governor rescinding the state's emergency.
Councilor,
That makes sense.
Councilmember Miller.
Dave, is it the goal to do these in like 3-week increments so that if the time comes that, you know, hey, we're no longer in any of these phases, are we lining these up with the phases so that we can make decisions as the phases happen or as they're perceived to happen because of the timeline that they're on?
Thus far, we've been unable, as Council well knows, to predict with any accuracy when these phases might exist, or when we might transition to the next phase. So not necessarily in line with the phases. I think more so just putting it out a couple of council meetings in advance, just to keep it on council's plate. And I think with the idea that we're fairly confident that the emergency is going to still continue to exist until at least that time. And if council ever wanted to rescind it, council could by, calling an emergency meeting or by addressing it at the next council meeting. And, I don't know if the city manager has any further thoughts, but this is, there's no rocket science here. We're basically just picking dates that we find reasonable.
Councilmember Greenstein?
Yeah, and I think you just answered it anyway, Dave, but for any public that might be watching, the council can rescind this, even if we were to just, instead of doing this till the 25th of June, if we were to make this until the governor's order expires, we could still rescind that at any time, correct?
That's absolutely right.
Thank
Do you have anything to add, Mr. City Manager?
Yeah, one thing maybe to consider, we did tie the suspension of, or limited council business to essential only because it related to COVID-19. And so as we continue to extend these declarations of emergency, that does preclude work sessions and council committees. That's maybe a worthy discussion for council. At some point, you can always go back to those ordinances and amend those and debuckle that from the declaration.
Yeah, so that's a conversation was hoping to have a little bit under the mayor's report. I do think we should have a conversation about bringing back some of our council committee assignments. We haven't heard a lot of, it's been COVID this entire time. And at some point we need to get back to doing the city's business. That's more than just COVID related. And so I'm hoping that we can have that discussion at some point. But our next council meeting is scheduled for when? Does anyone have that off the top of their head?
2 weeks.
Is it the first Thursday or the second Thursday?
11th.
July 11th, yeah. June 11th.
So the only question is if we should start bringing back our committee assignments and then would we need to change this emergency declaration before then so we could get back on some sort of committee assignment schedule? What would be your, let's just say maybe first of all, where's the council stand on at least getting back to committee assignments? Is everyone positive? Well, plus me. So what do we need to do to change this motion so we can maybe go back to committee assignments for next month, Dave?
Excuse me, do you think we need to change it in order to do that? Does it have to be?
Yeah, because right now the emergency declaration states that we'll only be doing COVID-related business.
Oh.
For the most part, yeah.
Well, Mr. Mayor, this resolution is going to, if passed, would continue the state of the declaration of the emergency. Council passed resolution, I don't recall the number, 1087, I believe it was. This was the week subsequent to council declaring the emergency. Council passed a separate resolution modifying some of council's procedures and some of the LMC provisions. That resolution could be modified without putting an end to the emergency. So it's a separate action that the council would take. So I can certainly prepare, and I'll talk to the city manager about this, for council's consideration at a subsequent meeting, perhaps on June 11th, some ideas on how to amend that to allow some more of those, council committee meetings and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. And so I think we can go forward with this resolution as is, and then with direction from this council saying, let's amend that ordinance. And so we can get at least start back in with our committee assignments. Does that feel right to everyone? Yeah. Okay. Then we have a motion and a second to adopt resolution 1090, which is the extension of emergency declaration related to COVID-19. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Next up is resolution 1091, which is the suspend enforcement actions relating to LID assessments. Back to Dave.
So thanks again, Mr. Mayor. I raised this issue a couple weeks ago at the last council meeting, and so during this pandemic, council's previously taken action to alleviate some of the negative economic effects that this pandemic's having. Actions that this council has previously taken has been to defer some business and occupation taxes, to suspend enforcement action for delinquent utility accounts. The council's relaxed some sign regulations to accommodate businesses. Additionally, the governor has placed some moratoriums on residential and some commercial evictions. So another area that we'd like to direct council's attention to are delinquent local improvement district assessments. So local improvement districts, when created, the costs for those are assessed to the benefited property owners. Now, those property owners are obligated then to repay that debt annually with an annual assessment. Now, by Lacey Municipal Code, any time a property owner is delinquent by 2 or more assessments, foreclosure proceedings are triggered, and the city staff is directed to instigate foreclosure proceedings by June 1st for those properties. So the recommendation for you tonight is to adopt and approve resolution 1091, which would temporarily suspend those enforcement actions against delinquent local improvement district assessments. I'll just remind council that there's not a whole lot of delinquent assessments. There's currently 4. The city would not be waiving any ability or right to collect those at a later date. However, it would be offering an opportunity for distressed citizens to take a little angst off their plate, hopefully. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Can I get a motion?
I would move to approve resolution 1091, temporarily suspending enforcement action against delinquent LID assessments.
Second.
And moved in second. Let's discussion.
I have something, Mr. Mayor, and it's unrelated, but I just want the public to know I'm wearing a mask because I'm in a public place. I'm in the lobby of Titus Will getting my oil changed and a bunch of work done and taking a lot longer. So that's why I have the mask.
I appreciate it. Thanks for letting the public know, and thanks for being safe. Councilmember Miller.
I just had a quick question. What is the duration of time between assessments, Dave?
They're annual, so it's 1 year. So there's 3 active local improvement districts. One of the, I think they're staggered. May, July, and perhaps November is when each of them are due. But for each individual one, there's only 1 annual payment.
Okay.
So that means they're behind 2 years.
Correct. And the suggested action wouldn't do anything by way of, the payments are still owing. They're still due. Interest is still accruing, as with people that aren't delinquent. This would just suspend any enforcement action by way of late fees or foreclosure proceedings.
Okay, and starting when? When's the starting point? Late fees were collected all the way up till when? And then we're suspending it as of right now?
We suspend it. So yes, they'd be effective now. It would effectively be for any assessments that are due in 2020 for the duration of this pandemic, this emergency. Again, we don't know how long that's going to last, but I think it's safe to assume that hopefully this will be over sometime in 2021, and then this would automatically be rescinded upon, rescission of the emergency.
So,
Sorry, go ahead. Councilor Miller, follow up and we'll go to Councilmember Cox.
okay, thanks. Suspending late fees from March 19th to whenever we stop is it, and also suspending any foreclosure proceedings. So 3 months of suspended charges and fees. Is that
Well, these, and again, I know I see Troy on there, so he can chime in to assist me here. What the delinquencies for local improvement district assessments, I believe, are only assessed one time, and I'll pass to Troy if that's an ongoing thing throughout the duration of the year or not.
That's correct. The interest accrues just the one time per year as we do the annual billing. So it's really not the duration of the year, but just a one time.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Not that I want anybody to be assessed anything. I'm just trying to get clarity. That's all.
No problem. Councilmember Cox.
Well, I'd first like to say I'm really glad that we can bring at least a little relief to people. I think it's really important that we do that in this really pressing time. And a message to Councilmember Stedman. My new mantra is real leaders wear masks. So go. Good for you.
So is there any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to pass this resolution 1091, suspending the enforcement actions relating to LID assessments. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. And next up, resolution 1092, which is the Heritage Capital Project Grant. And we'll go to Jen Burbidge. Possibly. There she is.
She was. Here I am. Hello.
Hey, Jen.
Hey,
It's good to see everybody.
I know, it's been a long time.
Yeah, even if through a camera lens. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Give me a moment. Oh, and it's not there, John. We even tested this. Okay. Try something. All right, I'm not seeing the slides, so
John, can you share on your end?
you mind sharing them, John? Sorry about that.
Yeah,
There's
just 1
a
second.
couple, so. Okay. Thank you. While he's doing that, I'll go ahead and get started. So I'm happy to bring a non-COVID related topic, but it's also so this afternoon, the recommendation is a motion to pass a resolution authorizing application for the Heritage Capital Project Grant. Oh, there it is. Thanks, John. So I've got a few slides to explain a little bit more, but before I get started, I just wanted to sincerely thank Erin Quinn Valcho, our museum curator, for all of her hard work on this project, and also and on this application, and also Ashley Smith, our capital projects manager as well. So here is a photo. This is not the most updated photo of the site. As you know, the depot's already been painted and the site work is underway for the playground structure to go in, but we didn't have the latest drone footage available. So we'll have that next time for you. But this just basically gives an overview of the current site. And this grant, as you do know, is through the Washington State Historical Society. So John, if you want to advance the slide. I'll give you the overall look at this project. You know, we've talked about this several times. It's a phased project. So phase 1 is the depot and the playground, which the depot is completed. The playground is not quite yet. We got delayed because of COVID. There was parking already installed. There's 20 spaces that are across Lebanon. And then, as you know, the install of Lebanon Street. So all of those items made up phase 1. Phase 2, we are currently in. And so that is set to be complete by spring of 2021. And that was the last grant application cycle, which was for the $979,000 for the new museum and site design. And KMB architect team is working on that. The reason for the $950,000, if you recall, the Historical Society keeps 3% for an administrative fee. Phase 3, which is what we're going to talk more about, is for the site work, and that's the current application. And I just want to clarify, that's to initiate phase 3. And that is the deadline that we're under of June 25th. And we've been working really hard to hit the application deadline pending your approval. Phase 4 will be part 1 of the building, and phase 5 will be part 2. And what those phases are comprised of will be determined by KMB with the current work that they are doing. John, if you want to move it forward. So just to go back to our last meeting, gosh, it feels like a lifetime ago. It was only in February. You'll probably recall KMB is currently working on the cost analysis for the building and for the site. And what we had talked about at the joint work session with the Historical Commission was that 2 paths had become clear at that time, taking a route that would require additional investment or working within the grant amount. And everyone thought that B was the best idea. We had discussed not being able to do a renovation in phases like we originally had wanted to do, and would have to spend a significant amount of money upgrading the shell to meet code requirements and not being able to use the interior in the meantime. So you'll probably remember this next slide from that same meeting. And this is the west view of what it would look like to bring the site to a pre-development state. And that's essentially what this grant application, this current application is for, is to bring the site to a pre-development state. You want to advance the slide? So let's talk about the current application. This is the initiation of phase 3. It's for $607,709. The matching, we were able to get to that amount by using matching funds from the depot construction and also the playground site work and playground structure itself. Like I said, this would initiate phase 3, which includes building demo, site clearing, some minor electrical improvements, some infrastructure, and then whatever environmental cleanup the Department of Ecology would require for the site. And one more slide, I think. Yeah, so just to recap the timeline for the phase 3 grant, they're due, like I said, in next month, or actually, yeah, next month, June 25th. They'll be ranked in August. They will be awarded by legislature if everything is on time in June of 2021. And the work could begin at the very earliest in July of 2021. And that's pretty optimistic. This last time, I think we got the contract underway by fall and got the work started. So that would be similar probably. As I mentioned, it would be just the initiation of phase 3. So continuation of phase 3 would still be necessary next. And that would include frontage improvements that would be required, and also the installation of underground utilities such as water, sewer, gas, and electric. And then a very important next step, as you know, is communication plan and that outreach and support to the community. And we talked about, once KMB is done with their current work, really having that product that we can take out to the community and really get their support. The Historical Commission has been working really hard on a communication plan, along with myself and our team and public as well. And so that's, of course, very important. And then just as important is exploring the funding options to finish phase 3 and then move on to the next phases. As you know, it's a long-term project. So, and with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Can I get a motion?
I move that we pass resolution authorizing application for Heritage Capital Project Grant Resolution number 1092.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Councilmember Greenstein.
So I think I know the answer to this, but let me just ask anyway. There's no additional fund from the city, from general fund. All of the matching funds are monies that have already been set aside, that have already been spent either on the depot or on the playground site work?
Yes, that's correct. There's no budgetary ask at this time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I guess the only concern I have, and we don't know yet, has these funds already been set aside by the state legislature and they're just waiting to be granted? Or now that we're in COVID and the state budget has taken a huge hit, is there a chance that this might not even get approved?
Yeah, so Erin is on the call as well. I don't know if she has anything to add, but my understanding is it's set aside, assuming that everything goes well.
Erin,
So.
can you answer?
Hi.
Hi.
So this is money that's specifically set aside for capital projects for this specific type of purpose. That having been said, during the recession of a decade ago, they did have a delay of some projects. Due to that, the legislature didn't approve the projects to go forward at that time, but the projects that were already on the list to be funded, they were able to, once that approval happened, to start their projects. So even if there was a delay, it would be important to be on the list.
Sounds good. Is there any other questions?
Just real quick, what amount are we asking them to match?
Oh, so it's a good question. It's a 1/3, 2/3 match. And so with is it 1.2 million?
That sounds close.
The match portion, and then we're asking for $607,709.
So roughly a little over 1.8
total.
If I heard you.
Total.
Okay. And then in order for us to do the site work, the prep work, we needed 679 plus what?
So that's just the initiation of the site work. There's going to be more site work that's needed, which the architect team is currently working on the rest of the.
Right.
It's kind of weird because we have one phase happening and then we're applying for the next. And so we don't quite have all the information, but we have enough match to get us started basically and hit the grant deadline with the site phase 3.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and second to adopt resolution 1092, the Heritage Capital Project Grant. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. Thanks, Jen. Good seeing you, Erin.
Good to see you guys. Thanks, John, for doing the slides.
Yep. So next, under Mayor's report, I just have a couple things I want to talk about. First, I know we discussed it this last during the talk for the resolution 1090 about getting back to committee reports and work sessions, and I think at some point, I think we need to have a sort of broader discussion of the things we have learned during this time of COVID-19 and really take a hard look at what's the best way for us to be doing the people's work. Sometimes we get in these ruts where we do things because that's the way they've always been done. And so, for me, I always like to, work smarter and not necessarily harder. And so I'm hoping at some point we can have this a conversation that's like, do we continue to meet at 7 o'clock when this is all over? Or do we, meet at 6 o'clock? And so now we're not putting as much stress on all of our staff who's having to stay an extra hour later. There's those sort of things like that. We've always done it, but why have we always done it? I just hope we can have a conversation at some point about that. And that's one thing. And I think we can start to have those conversations next month when we figure out some committee assignments, and maybe we even throw in a work session at some point to sort of talk about what we've learned during this time and maybe some things that we need to look at. The other thing is just a reminder. Yes, we passed resolution 1090, but the Open Public Meetings Act is have been extended. Those requirements have which allows us to do what we're doing right now has only been extended until the end of this month. And so the legislature has to approve that, or we're going to be in conflict with OPMA. And so I think some of us were sent an email from the governor's office saying they've asked the legislature to do that, waiting to hear back. They're hoping they're going to come, that's going to happen, but there's a little bit of a concern there. Councilmember Greenstein?
Is that a Four Corners thing, or is that something where
It's
they
the
actually
Four
have to
Corners.
bring the ledge back into session?
Four Corners can do it.
Okay.
So they've asked the Four Corners. They haven't taken it up yet. They hope they will. So there's a little uncertainty there, but that's somewhat out of our control. If they don't get it in time, then we're going to have to react quickly and figure that out. And then the last thing I want to give this council an update on is the ongoing discussion with the Community Development Block Grant, additional money coming to this region. I just had another meeting about that earlier today with Olympia, Tumwater, the county, and Yelm representing South County. And what we're originally talking about, and I talked to this council about, is really setting aside the majority of those funds for food security. And that is still something that needs to be addressed. The big sort of the game changer that has happened is in order to get into phase 2, we had to show that there is a significant amount of testing that's happening within our county. And that testing has to be available to people of lower income who do not have insurance or can't afford to do the test for themselves. Right now, that's being covered by Providence through a drive-in testing site in Northeast Lacey. Providence has let the county know that come like June 25th or sometime in there, they're no longer going to be doing that all on their dime. And right now, it is costing Providence St. Peter's about $25,000 a week. That's a big number, 25 grand a week. And so the county thinks there can be some cost savings within that 25,000 a week. For example, they're having to pay for security over there because it's a temporary site and they have all their supplies outdoors. And so they have to have someone there watching those supplies. And so there's a cost to that. What they're really hoping for, and one of the things we talked about was, can we get a mobile van of some sort that can go around to different parts of the county and to do testing? There's a lot of different ideas out there when it comes to testing, but in order for us to get from phase 2, to stay in the phase 2 and to get to phase 3, we have to continue to abide by a lot of restrictions that we have out there, and testing is one of them. So what we've done is we've asked the county and saying, well, the different pots of money that we have available to this region, including these funds. We know food security is a huge, huge issue. Meals on Wheels has a huge demand right now. We all know about homeless backpacks, and there's, in general, we also talked about, it does make sense for maybe the Thurston County Food Bank to be the main organization. If we're going to focus on food security, maybe they can be the main organization that we give to, and then they distribute out to the other organizations for food security. And one way or the other, we think that's going to happen. We just don't know which pots of money where it's going to come from. So the county's going to go back and try to do some, this is really kind of a math problem, and try to figure this out. And then we'll come back to the same group within the next couple of weeks and at least give us a recommendation of how they think we should spend those dollars. So, and the other thing I just want to talk about is, congratulations, Lacey. We made it into phase 2. And that was, it's a really important milestone, which really means that we've had a lot of people who've had a lot of sacrifice and a lot of patience that allow us to get to this point where we could apply for that variance early. And it means that we've, have gotten this far, but there's no guarantee we're going to continue on this same path. Matter of fact, as soon as the variance was accepted, I think we have all seen that in the paper that there is a long-term care facility in Tumwater that has had an outbreak. And so it's can expand real quick, and it's pretty scary. But one of the things I talked about, we did a press release, and we had King 5 and Cairo 7 and the Olympian there, and the chair of the county commission, myself, the mayor of Olympia, and the mayor of Yelm are all there talking about, what phase 2 looks like. Now we will have retails coming back. You can go inside and pick up retail, which is very important, especially for our budgets and everything else. There's limited indoor seating now. And then there's other service industries that are back, like dog grooming and some other, and of course haircuts. I know a lot of us, I just chopped off my hair right before this all happened, but it gives us some of those things back. But one of the things I talked about is thinking, we made it through this time, but our small businesses are still really hurting. And one of the only ways we can really pull through this as a community is if we think about shopping local first. And I spent my entire time talking about this at the press conference, where we've been so, I think, addicted to really cheap, fast online services that and especially during this time of COVID, where we've been stuck at home. I know I've bought things online, but now that we have this opportunity to support our local businesses, I think it's really important that we think, if I need a product, can I get it local first? And I hope that's something that everyone here listening to from the city of Lacey is thinking about. It's more important now more than ever to support your local businesses and shop local. And that's the way we're gonna save some of these small businesses who have just taken the brunt of this COVID-19, who been through no fault of their own, have maybe seen their entire life's work and life savings just completely disappear within a couple months. So that's just something I wanted to put out there. I talked to our city manager about the city of Lacey doing a public service announcement about shopping local, maybe doing something with the chamber. And so that's going to be an ongoing conversation. But those are a couple of things I just want to talk about under the mayor's report. And if there's no questions, we'll go on to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. We do have a couple items before you. We have the 2020 Overlay Project Award, and Scott Ager will take a little bit of transition time to present that report to you.
So good evening, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you.
Yes.
All right. You can go without seeing me. I've gone without a haircut for a really long time. So, yeah.
You're not alone, Scott.
Yeah, I'm sure you have lovely locks.
I'd like to say it hasn't been this long since high school, but that just wouldn't be true. So can you see the presentation on the screen now?
We can.
Yes.
All right. So I'm here tonight to ask you for your support and approval of our 2020 overlay program. So we are recommending approval of project PW 2020-14 to Miles LLC from Puyallup. The low bid was $1,398,405. There were 6 bidders on this round, and there are 60 working days in this contract. And we expect the project to begin in July. So I just have a couple slides here broken into North Lacey and South Lacey, a little bit of TBD history. So this will be our first Transportation Benefit District project in North Lacey. It will be Meridian Road from 31st Avenue to 46th Avenue, which is about 1.25 miles in length. And then we will also be doing the Orion roundabout and the approaches. So this is an overlay, a rehab program. So it's not a complete rebuild, but we are going to push the width out a tiny bit. So the cross section of the road will be 30 feet wide. There'll be 2 11-foot lanes and 2 4-foot shoulders. So then the little bit more history. Here's a map of kind of South Lacey, and you can see that the projects in red were our 2018 TBD projects. And then last year in 2019 was our Super T project, which was about a $5 million project, but we had about $3 million in grants. So we got a really great bang for our buck. And then also just want to give you a quick look at what we're considering for next year, what we have in the hopper for next year. And that's Carpenter Road from Mullen to 32nd Avenue. Actually, we would have programmed in Carpenter this year. Is a little worse condition than Meridian Road. However, we wanted to wait until the county finishes the Mullen Road project with the roundabout at Mullen and Carpenter in order to tie this new road into it. So that's on the program from next year. You've probably noticed there's a pretty good difference in dollar amount between the engineer's estimate, which was 1.9 million, and low bid, which was about 1.4. A big reason for that was the cost, where the bid came in, the price per ton for asphalt. So for this bid, there was $84 a ton. And for the exact same type of asphalt for both the Super T and College and 22nd, it was $110 and $111 per ton. So it's a considerable reduction. You all know that the cost of fuel and asphalts have gone down. So we're benefiting a little bit from that, and then also a little bit from the bid climate. So with that said, if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Can you please take down the screen?
Sure. Let's see.
There you go.
There we go.
Can I get a motion?
Sure. I move to award Lacey contract number PW 2020-14 to low bidder Miles Resources LLC from Puyallup, Washington, in the amount of $1,398,405.
I second it.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Councilmember Stedman.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing I wanted to point out was we, according to engineer's estimate, we saved almost $500,000. So that's great. Sometimes we're ahead on, on estimates, and sometimes we're behind. This time we made up a little ground, so that's always great to save some money. But how does Scott or anyone know how much our overall street rating will improve with all these projects the last few years from the MPD?
So yeah, actually, this won't influence our pavement condition index much at all. I think y'all know that when we're doing all the promotions for the Transportation Benefit District, that we would need considerably more funds than the TBD generates just to hold the PCI level. But this will prevent it from declining. My guess would be that it will hold pretty close to steady, but it definitely won't go up.
That's great.
Any other questions? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to award this to the low bidder. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
So the other item before council is COVID-19 sort of discussion about a strategy for recovery. You may know that we received about $1.5 million in CARES Act funding through the state. And there needs to be just a global discussion from council about how do we spend those dollars. And to help that discussion, we invited Michael Cade from Thurston EDC to talk about really the economic side of the road recovery in response to COVID-19. And then followed by that, we're going to have Chris Wells from United Way to talk about really the strains that social services are actually experiencing because of COVID-19. And I believe Michael Cade is being transitioned now.
Thank you. I just want to make sure, just process check, you can hear me and see me okay?
Yep, great.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and council members. Thank you for the invitation to come chat with you a little bit about economic recovery. I like to always start my comments out with the notion that economic recovery needed to start on March 1st. It doesn't start tomorrow, it doesn't start the next day, but we needed to start thinking about recovery when this thing was marching our way, and it certainly is here. And we've done some very exciting things and some very proactive things. I'm not going to spend time with you this evening talking about the data, about the impacts. We've all heard about the impacts. I don't think our time would be well spent doing that. If you'd like to have a deeper dive as to some of the data that we're starting to see and the fiscal impacts and the business impacts, I'd be glad to spend another hour and a half of your time doing that. It's been significant. So I think the bulk of my time will be talking about strategies, implementation steps, and moving forward in recovery. So what I'd like to do is share my screen, or John, can you share my screen? I sent over the slides, but I can certainly do it from here. Why don't I
try to do it on yours?
Okay. So I want to make sure, can you see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm going to leave it on that mode because my computer is not upgraded to allow me to shift back and forth. So it's on the not on the presentation, but the notes mode. And I've sent over a bunch of these slides. There's 12 of them or so, and I'm not going to get through all of them, but I wanted to make sure you had them so you can look through them at your leisure. But one of the things I really wanted to really start talking about is how is our group working together, and how do we set the stage for recovery? And notion that there's a moniker out there called thirstinstrong.org. I encourage you to go to that site. And I'm going to show you some statistics on who's using that site in just a minute, but it's been very effective. And how do we disseminate information? This is not an Economic Development Council initiative. This is a Thurston County initiative. We're all in the same boat. We're all in the same oars. We're pushing this thing forward. So it's the notion that the largest regional economic development practitioners are working together with you. Pacific Mountain Workforce Development Council, the Visitors Convention Bureau, Thurston Chamber, the Economic Development Council, Port of Olympia, the City of Lacey, the City of Olympia, City of Tumwater, and Thurston County. We meet on a regular basis to figure out, okay, what's the best way to implement joint strategies and push this thing up the hill. The number one thing is be wise. We adopted a principle, let's be wise and let's be proactive. As I just kind of started this thing off, notion is that we are not thinking about recovery next week. We're thinking about recovery that needed to start 3 weeks, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. So we want to be wise. And so how do we do that? So we distill it down into kind of, if an economic developer can't create a box and a chart, probably need to go back to school. But economic developers like to put things in boxes in bite-sized chunks. And the bite-sized chunks that we have is respond. Let's respond to make sure that we understand that businesses are absolutely being hammered right now. This is not 2008, 2009, where we saw slow degradation. This is a quick thing. We all fell in the hole together. So let's respond. Let's be proactive. Let's reset. Let's reset our economy. Let's understand that anywhere between 15 and 45% of the people that lost their jobs this last month probably won't have those jobs back within the next year. It just isn't going to happen. Things have changed and are changing dramatically. But let's don't wallow in it. Let's relaunch. Let's relaunch Thurston County's economy. Let's look for strategies for reopening now and when we can, along with the phases. The mayor's comments about a measured approach for phase 2 and phase 3, spot on. Let's do this and make sure it lasts and sticks. This is the last 2 months of my life I do not want to go through again. So let's make sure we do this right. Let's do it in a measured approach. But on the way to do that, to relaunch, let's make sure we're looking at economic catalyst projects to push forward and make sure that Thurston County is on the front edge of the next wave of the economy. Thurston Strong, as I mentioned, it really is a resource. It's a clearinghouse of information. I'm going to scroll down a little bit just to give you an idea. You know, the folks that look at Thurston, I should have reordered these slides, but if you look at this, if you just look at the traffic on thirstinstrong.org, 22% of users right now are coming from the city of Lacey. That's the highest user of all the county jurisdictions. And so what that tells me is that A, you have a very engaged business community, but we're starting to send messages that resonate with the businesses in your community. And not only that, but we're being effective and that we're moving that pace forward. So keep that in mind as we talk about Thurston Strong. What does it mean? One of the things that we talked about is Job Corps. It was on a web call this afternoon with the Director of Commerce. If you look at the unemployment that has occurred, unemployment claims that happened between 2000 and 2008 and 2009 by week and add them up, they do not equal the unemployment claims that occurred during a 2-week period last month in Washington State. That number frightens the heck out of me. So let's think about when we talk about unemployment, these are families, these are individuals, these are folks that are very stressed about their future. Let's find an opportunity to get them back to work. But also while we're doing it, let's find a way for us to support stressed either nonprofits or stressed organizations or communities. Job Corps concept, think about in terms of the 1930s during the Great Depression, we had the Civilian Conservation Corps. We reap the benefits of some of that work right now, and it's a wonderful legacy in America. But this is something that we think we can do right now with the Job Corps. We find the resources, we find the dislocated worker, we work with the nonprofits, put them to work, we retain them as a 1099 worker, and we put them to work. We have a set amount of hours that they can work, voila, and then we transition them into either the original job or they're hired as a regular employee at their new spot. So this is kind of an evolving, innovative thing. I've shopped this around Washington State with my other economic developers, and this is kind of seems to resonate. I'm starting to see it percolate all over the state now as a potential for really moving the economy forward and starting that notion of relaunch and reset. We need to help people get reset. How does it work? There's your wheel of goodness from local funding to tax revenue generation back into the local economy. And so you start thinking about it as a cycle with that Job Corps as it impacts the rest of the state's economy or the local economy. Childcare capacity strategy. Childcare capacity strategy. This is, there's a couple things that keep me up at night. This is one of them. Absolutely. Childcare was in crisis before COVID-19. Childcare is in crisis during COVID-19, and childcare will be an absolute crisis as we move out of this. We have to address it. We have to figure out how we're going to fix it. It's either legislative or it's financial or whatever it is, but something's got to be done. It's got to be done very quickly. As the economy moves back into phase 2, phase 3, who's going to take care of your children? As we know by working with the Child Care Action Council, we know that 50% of all spots in Thurston County for childcare are gone. They just don't exist anymore, and they're not coming back. And so, you know, if you think about the schools that may not start, I don't know what the situation is in the fall, but if they don't come back, we're just back into a very exacerbated situation. So let's fix our ability to childcare capacity. Some of the items that we've talked about, City of Lacey and the Parks Department and working with other Parks Department, that is great thinking, because that builds that foundation of families and individuals to make sure they can get back to work. Let's talk about a business relaunch strategy, direct assistance. Go no further than when you open up the dictionary, a business relaunch strategy is how do you keep business doors open? Look at the City of Lacey. You guys have done incredible work when you think about that grant. You saw the great stories. I think Kaylee provided to you a number of testimonials. I'm a kind of a sensitive guy anyway, and I get kind of teary, but it was hell for me to deliver those checks to those people and watch these tear up. I just couldn't do it anymore because I just couldn't sense the sense of loss and gratitude that they have to relaunch their business. We have to think in terms of how we relaunch businesses and get them going. This is important to us. This is absolutely important. It's direct assistance. We'll talk a little bit later about the work that we're doing at the Center for Business Innovation. You have an economic development system. You've got the EDC, you've got the Center for Business Innovation, you've got the Chamber of Commerce, you've got the Experience Olympia and the BCB and the workforce. Your system is not cracking. your economic development system is flexing its muscles right now, but we need to make sure that we're relaunching those businesses and to do it. Recovery catalyst to replace lost jobs. That's targeted recruitment, expansion, investment. I do not want to be the first one in Washington State. I'm going to go into other stressed communities and recruit those companies. But what we can do right now is prepare ourselves to seek out investment in companies that are looking to expand into this market share. What we've learned with this COVID environment is that business will continue in some fashion. We need just to create ways to do that. What we found is that remote business, we were talking about it in 1991 when I first got my economic development job, is that we're all going to be doing remote work. It never happened. It happened. So let's figure out, do we have the technology? Do we have the infrastructure? And do we are recruiting the right companies into this community so that the next time this comes around, if God forbid, we can continue to move that investment strategy moving forward. That's an investment strategy in the community. So we talked about that chart a little bit, but that, again, that's where users are coming from, and it's all over. It's not just one pocket. It's Lacey, it's Olympia, it's Tumwater. It's interesting to see those items on that chart that aren't in Thurston County. People look to Thurston County set the pace. And quite frankly, I get mentioned to a couple of folks yesterday that I get calls from around the state is, how did Lacey set up their business grant? Why did they do it? Who do I talk to? Can we mirror that? What are some best practices? People look to us to set the table. Some of the things that we've done, and I'm not going to set a lot of things about what we do at the EDC. The only thing I'm going to point to you is that third bullet item, 11,000 business cases. We typically get in a busy year about 5,000 a year. This is just in the last month and a half. So the demonstration that the business is hurting, there's a need there. We're pivoting. I didn't even like to use that word. We're transitioning and we're focusing resources to make sure that we're relaunching and we're resetting and we're recovering. So I know that's a lot. I went through a lot of stuff. There's a really deep strategy there. I wanted to give you the highlights of what we're talking about. But I will tell you that your economic development ecosystem, it's not just the EDC, it's all of us working together. Rick and George are fantastic partners and leaders. The system is not cracking, but it's flexing our muscles, and we're flexing that muscle to push out how we're going to relaunch and reset our economy. Questions, comments, concerns? I know I went through there fast. I got a lot of other data I'd love to share with you, but 10 minutes is 10 minutes.
Can you please take down your screen, Michael? There you go. Do you have any questions for Michael? Anything? I guess my Councilmember Stedman.
I just want to say, Mayor, to Mike Cade, that he was tugging at my heartstrings, and I was tearing up a little bit too. So he's not alone. The business community is our community, and when they're strong and they're vibrant and they have resilience, so does the whole city and the county. It has a ripple out effect. So I know all the hard work him and Kaylee and everybody's done to help our business community, and just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments. You're welcome.
So,
love to do it. It's good.
Mike Colcade, do you have an ask from this council? I mean, what else do you need from the city of Lacey? I mean, first of all, thank you so much for being the agent that went through those applications and did all a lot of the heavy lifting there. Obviously, we've all heard the amazing stories, and I'm just so proud of this council that we were able to come up with this idea and get it to launch as quickly as we did. But at this point, what else what else can we do as this council moving forward, especially looking at the CARES Act money that we have?
Yeah, I've got three things. The number one thing is leadership. I know it's easy to say, but leadership without engagement, you need to be engaged, and you are. Stay engaged, stay your leadership. Let's stay in this boat together. I am absolutely committed, this organization, to working with your team. That's the number one thing, Mayor, is that keep that leadership moving forward. Keep thinking about those ideas. Do not be shy about throwing them on the wall and see if they stick. If we stop doing that, we will lose. We are, I don't mean to be melodramatic, we're in the fight for our lives, quite frankly. We have a real tough situation. We'll get through it. I know it. So leadership and engagement. The second thing really is fiscal resources. We need fiscal resources. And this is hard for me to say, I've been before you to talk about money. Man, it's hard for me to do that. We will figure things out. But we do need that fiscal support to do that. What that number is, we can talk about that later down the road. But we do need to have some fiscal support to do these things. Without fiscal resources, we just won't go. And then we'll put a lot of sweat equity into it, and we'll move things around. But if we're going to be proactive to really launch into that recovery phase, we do need those fiscal resources. And then the last thing is don't be shy. Don't be shy. I have every year my board of directors does a review of my performance, and they say, Michael, the number one thing you do that you need to work on is you keep your head down and you just work. We're workhorses, Mayor. We're not a show pony. I'm absolutely not. So you need to not be shy to tell me, dang it, Kate, 1, 2, 3, get it done. So that comes with that engagement. So one is leadership and engagement. Second one is fiscal resources. And third one is do not be shy and do not forget about those ideas that you've already come up with.
Thank you. What I would suggest is on the fiscal ask is that you work with our staff and let us know what that is, and so we can have a conversation as a council on getting you some of those CARES Act dollars.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question, Michael. So because we're such a diverse community, and a lot of our businesses are run by a lot of ethnic business owners, do you think, or do you know how many businesses shut down because they were uncomfortable coming to you to ask for help,
or didn't know about you?
I'm gonna answer that maybe in a way that you probably didn't anticipate. I do not think that the inclusion was a element of why people shut and closed down. I will guarantee you it is the biggest inhibitor for them restarting. And if we're not being inclusive and if we're not being equitable about how we develop those resources and where we deploy them, then we got a real problem. What we didn't learn coming out of 2000, 2008, and 2009 was that inclusivity. I had this meeting with the leader of the Hispanic Roundtable in Seattle, and he just took me to task. And you said, so the number one thing is make sure that we're developing resources bilingual. We're doing it, and we will do it. So the number one issue wasn't exclusivity this happened to us all. We all fell in the hole. But if we're not thinking about it in those terms, that's the recovery and relaunch. We'll leave people behind. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it. We will not do that. Great question.
Anyone else? Scott?
Well, not to put Michael on the spot, we did have a request a couple of weeks ago about a fiscal ask that was about $70,000. And I know that's just the infrastructure of EDC to be able to keep supporting. That's probably just the infrastructure and not the programs or services that would be needed, which I think are still being discussed and maybe planned out. Is that a fair assessment?
That's correct. That request really is the infrastructure. I'll give you the R-rated version of our budget, Scott. I typically secure about $250,000 of private investment into my organization by this time every year, and that gives me a lot of flexibility. I've got $200 this year.
Wow. Got it.
So I have our lift here, the R-rated version, and speaking in a public forum, is about $100,000 a month to keep this moving forward. But those dollars, when we identified, what that ask would be, it would be a leverage against other grants I can go after. They go against other community investments. They go to support our partner agencies to do that work. The EDC doesn't have to be the end all and be all. I mean, I know that, but that request will make me whole, and will make me not necessarily whole, but allows me to go after those programmatic dollars that allow us to relaunch and re-energize our local economy. There's a lot of sweat equity that goes in with that $70,000. And so that's the humble request.
So Scott, when
You're
is those
absolutely correct.
Act dollars going to be available to us for us to redistribute?
So we're working on the reimbursement, but the way the CARES Act dollars work, that we basically have to upfront the money and then we get reimbursed once we prove that we've had costs related to that. You may recall when we did the budget amendment on May 14th, we preloaded the budget with $100,000 for economic development goals and about $100,000 for social services. So you have the capacity to respond to at least up to 100,000 at this point.
Okay.
One of the things that this is a different economic model. Normally, when you invest $1 into the Economic Development Council, we turn around and last year we created $4.50 in the economy. So $1 equals $5.50. I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but I know that from our efforts already, $1 equals at least $2.50 in local economy. So think in those terms as well as that return on investment that you get back and how we can generate those revenues back to you. It's that system, it's a wheel of goodness that we like to refer to, that the dollar invested generates X amount.
Since we've already made the budget amendment, I would move that we give the request of $70,000 to the Economic Development Council through our budget process. Does everyone understand the motion? The EDC requested $70,000. We budgeted $100,000. I'm moving that we give them the $70,000 as requested. We have a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
So
Thank
Mayor
you.
Council, I'll take that as direction, and that staff will work with EDC with a contract for $70,000 to support that effort.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And as always, stand ready to assist you and work with you. And anytime you need stuff, just let me know. Okay.
So, Michael, before you go, I think the one thing that keeps me up at night too is the childcare issue. I mean, and so I'd love to stay involved in that discussion and how Lacey through our parks, whatever else we can do to help assist that. I mean, I don't know what the need is. We can feel it's great, obviously, but it'd be as we're moving into the next phases, if we don't have childcare, I don't know how we restart our economy. It's just as simple as that. And so, I think we need to continue that conversation, and whatever great ideas this council has, don't be shy. As Michael said, let's hear them. Let's discuss them.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Thank you.
So next up.
Yeah, so we should have Chris Wills from United Way, and to get her perspective on really what's going on in social service community and what concerns that she's seeing in Thurston County.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. I can only see 4 people at a time because I have to do this on my phone, so I apologize. John, do you have, Scott told me to put together a couple of slides. They're not pretty, but really to talk about what our priorities are going to be in human services I'm thinking over the next 12 months, what we should be anticipating and preparing for now. You can go ahead and skip to the second slide. But back when the whole thing started, we were trying to anticipate what the greatest needs were going to be as people were being laid off and losing their jobs and going into shelter in place lockdown mode, and really try to get in front of it and be prepared in advance for what we expected and have now seen as a wave in need in a much broader population typically, right? So usually, the vast majority of the people who are being impacted due to layoffs and job loss have not ever had to access social service safety nets before, rent assistance, utility assistance, maybe help paying a mortgage that wasn't federally backed, where they had a lender who would work with them on mortgage payments and things like that. So you can see just on the basic needs, everything you have been talking about in your meeting here is the case, and that's what we see. We had already had an MOU in place with the Community Action Council of Lewis, Mason, and Thurston County for emergency response prior to this. So we'd worked with them before during the partial government shutdown. We worked with them on the Nisqually flood, and then now on this much larger effort related to COVID-19. So we had a system in place for very quickly activating emergency assistance, scaling up in this case with COVID-19, because we knew we were going to be dealing with many, many more people, and having Community Action Council act as our partner in helping with rent and mortgage assistance, utilities, and childcare if it was needed. So to date, CAC in a typical month receives about 50 requests in a month for rent assistance. And in the month of April alone, and I'll have the May numbers sometime next week, in April alone, they had 376 COVID-related requests for assistance with rent and utilities. And we prioritize that because even though we know that there's a moratorium on evictions and utility shutoffs, those debts are still accumulating. So it creates an enormous amount of stress and pressure on families who are already in a time of really great anxiety. And we want to be able to accomplish a couple of things with that. One, not have families that are accumulating a rent debt over a several month period, that once the moratoriums are lifted, they don't have the capacity to repay because they haven't worked in several months. And the other thing is, as long as we can help people continue paying their rent and mitigate the worst financial impacts on individuals and families, and ensure to the greatest degree possible that landlords are still getting paid, that's money that continues to circulate in the local economy and helps shore it up in that way. So far, right now with CAC, as of my report with them this morning, they have had about 450 qualified households to date that they are working through case management for. And there's, I think the average number of people in the household is like 3.34 people. So it's about 1,300 individuals who are pre-qualified now to get that assistance through CAC, and they're just working through the cases and getting that money distributed as quickly as they can. They've also done not as much, but maybe 10 or 15,000 in utility assistance. But of the 150,000 that we've already granted to them, they have allocated probably 115,000 of it at this point. I get weekly updates from them. We have not had requests for childcare, but that funding is available to help pay for childcare when people can go back to work if they still have childcare available to them. The other thing that we became aware of very early was distribution of essential supplies and how many people were not able to access them when people started panic buying food and infant supplies and shelf-stable food supplies. There were a lot of poor families throughout the county who didn't have the ability to do that kind of hoarding, for lack of a better word. And then when quantity limits were placed on purchase of those items, it created even greater distress. So we started a system of doing large bulk purchases for a number of organizations that you'll see in a couple slides from now, to make sure that essential supplies were getting everywhere they needed to be in the county when people didn't have access to things like the other bank or the food bank or other resources that were close to them and accessible. And of course, as you were talking about before, food security, we've done quite a lot there. Let's go to the next slide. So our priorities have been from the very beginning in launching the Thurston County COVID-19 Response Fund was ensuring a couple of things. One, that essential programs that had seen a significant demand in need for their services they have to scale up and they're not going to have the resources to do that. And so we had to make sure that essential programs were fully funded. And that includes, you'll see on the list, is the congregant feeding meal programs, nutrition and services for seniors, shelter programs, child care provider supports, emergency support for immigrant communities was really important, because a lot of times, you know, they're not going to request assistance from certain organizations because they think that they could then be vulnerable. And then, of course, providing individual and family assistance, as we described with the funding that we provide to CAC. What we've also been doing is staying in close communication with all of the other local funders and keeping our eyes on where funding is landing so we can identify gaps. That's in the next slide, I'm sorry. So we can identify gaps and ensure that essential services continue to be fully funded. And we just do that in partnership with the, you know, you can see here, the HHSC is the interlocal agreement between the cities and the county, the Health and Human Services Council, of course, the CDBG money that is now being allocated or in the process of allocation, I think. And then Thurston County and the individual cities themselves with other health and human service dollars they have. Of course, we're working in partnership with the Community Foundation. We now know that there's other funding that's being made available for workforce development from Pac Mountain. And Councilmember Pratt is aware of the EFSP funding that we just released an application process for. That's another $354,000 that we'll be allocating for the regular phase of emergency food and shelter fund program dollars, and of course, United Way funding that we have available, and our COVID-19 funding. So what we're looking for is to have 360 degrees of insight now into where all of these recovery dollars and emergency assistance dollars are landing, and then looking to see what essential programs still need additional resources and how we can continue to resource individuals and families so that they know that they're going to be able to feed their family. They know that they're going to be able to pay their rent, their utilities are going to be covered, and they are going to get through this as we emerge gradually through these various phases of COVID recovery. So United Way has really pivoted 100% to COVID-19 response and recovery efforts, not just during this acute phase, right? This is going to be a much more chronic condition that we'll be dealing with at the very least for another year, year and a half, maybe 2 years. And we have to make sure that essentials for people continue to be funded, right? What do I have on the next slide? The next slide is, and this is the last one, is just to give you an idea into what we have been funding and what we are looking to continue funding and resourcing. And it's what I've heard you talking about this afternoon, making sure that basic needs are met, that we're providing for seniors, that we are attentive to food security throughout the county and ensuring that that's fully resourced, even as they scale up. We also, 2 weeks ago, I think, funded a 30-day food supply in the event of more significant supply chain disruptions that might impact the ability of these congregant meal programs and senior services and Thurston County Food Bank to meet the demand that they're experiencing right now, because it is significant. Providing resources to child care centers throughout the county for sanitation and hygiene supplies, and the same thing for our shelters as they expand and need to make sure that they are able to meet the needs of social distancing for their clients, and that they're able to maintain, the sanitation and the cleaning protocols that they need to do to keep the shelters clean. Continuing to provide essential supplies through our distribution channels and Family Support Center, FEST, Together, homeless backpacks, and the Nurse Family Partnership Program. I think most of you, if not all of you, have seen some of the reporting that we've sent back for you to evaluate. But what we're looking at now is what you're already talking about. Funding essential programs and making sure they stay whole, supporting individuals and families as we expect to see very high unemployment in the next 12 months, and making sure that we're keeping our eyes on the horizon all the time and anticipating what might be next, and being in more of a posture now of dealing with this in the longer term, 12 to 18 months at least. And you can take down the slides. I just want to answer any questions you have.
Does anyone have any questions?
So one of the things, because there's so many organizations that are working so fast and furious right now, sometimes it seems like they have some overlaps. I don't know how that's sorted out, or if that's a problem with duplicate types of things. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't seen any of that in any of the funding that we've been doing because we're working directly in coordination. For example, when we have several programs that we've now ensured are fully funded through the remainder of the fiscal year, which ends June 30, right? So when we were looking at what the funding needs were for Catholic Community Services for the Community Kitchen Program, I talked to Tom Webster at the county because I knew that they were also working on how much they were going to fund for that same program, and talked to Gabe Ash at Catholic Community Services and looked at their budget and how they had to change that program and where the gap was, right? So they had money that was coming to them from the county. They had the funding that they already had secured for the program through EFSP and through United Way in our previous funding cycles. And then they basically costed out what the additional supplies they were going to need, how much more food they were going to need, because they scaled it up. And then we saw what the gap was, right? We knew what their funding sources were. With Senior Services for South Sound, they're very transparent. They let us know that they're applying for CDBG funds. They showed us all of the information about how, they had to scale up when seniors couldn't come for the congregant meal programs any longer. They have essentially, at this point, nearly quadrupled the number of seniors they're serving with Meals on Wheels. And they get partial funding for that through the Area Agency on Aging. And then I saw what the HHSC, as soon as those funding decisions were made by the HHSC, I was immediately looped in on that. So I knew how much funding they had from those dollars, those basic needs dollars, and we were able to fund the difference. So really just maintaining the relationships with all of the other funders and coordinating our funding so that we know that we are not overlapping on our funding, and we can identify the gaps and make sure that what's essential gets fully funded.
So Chris, didn't United Way get some Direct CARES Act dollars? And how much, if that's the case, how much did you receive? And what's your budget looking like right now?
So United Way doesn't get CARES Act funding directly, and that flows through the EFSP program, Emergency Food and Shelter Fund program. So we have our annual phase, right? So at the same time they released what phase 37 was going to be, they also notified us of what the CARES Act funding was going to be. So the two combined are $354,000. And we administer that with this local EFSP board, right? We allocate it. We're in the process of now scoring all the applications for the EFSP dollars. And then we'll make our determination, I think, June 3rd, right? It's June 3rd. We're scoring the applications now. We make our determinations on June 3rd. And then those funds flow directly from Department of Homeland Security to the agencies for those programs, right?
But they're two siloed programs.
Yes, they're two separate buckets of money, the phase 37 funds and the CARES Act funds, but combined is $354,000. I think it was about 200 plus thousand for CARES, right? Yeah. So we're in the process of doing that now, but the dollars don't actually flow through United Way.
Great, yeah. So then how are you doing on your budget? I know you're right. You didn't receive direct CARES Act money, but you're receiving some extra money during this time. So how's your budget looking?
Grim, to be honest. In pivoting to COVID response, typically when we do emergency response, right, it's a smaller, more compact situation like the Nisqually flood, right? Where the number of households that are impacted, you identify what the most urgent need is, and it might be, $50,000 or $100,000 or something like that, and we just administer that and take care of the problem and move on. In this more chronic condition that we're going to be experiencing, We have a lot of money flowing through United Way right now, but as it stands today, right now, we're doing that at significant expense to ourselves. We are only taking 5% for administrative expense, and that doesn't come anywhere. That we can't fund our operation on 5%, but that was the commitment that we made. In any donation that is directed to the COVID-19 response fund, 5% would go to help cover our administrative expense, and then 95% is getting out the door. And then in our other fundraising, because the thing people are thinking about the most all the time is COVID, and what are we going to do about COVID? So right now we are working on what our longer term strategy is going to be, because we can't live off of 5%, and we have a lot of really mission critical work that we need to continue to do, right? So, we are looking to some other funders ourselves to help shore up our operating expense so that we can continue to do this very specific COVID related response over the long term, and trying to anticipate what the impacts are going to be, because we have a very business centric development model, right? We do workplace giving campaigns. If unemployment is going to be 20+% and sustained over a long period of time, and I can't remember who it was who was talking about it earlier, but 20, 25, 30% for any period of time, that's going to deeply impact payroll deducted giving. It's also going to impact, corporate giving and corporate sponsorship, because when revenues are down, philanthropy is going to be down. So we're going to have to be really creative ourselves to make sure that we can stay alive and whole and healthy to do what we're intended to do, which is be nimble and robust and credible in our response in the community.
Right. Does anyone else have any questions? Councilmember Seddon?
Thanks, Mayor. Great presentation, Chris. I just want to give a shout out to Mike Leonard too, Gateway Rotarian, everybody else down at the United, and the awesome job you guys do. I think this presentation brings a great awareness to people that wouldn't normally know all the things you do in the community. And it reminds me of like Thurston County Veteran Services, where there's a lot of veteran programs, but they pick up all the little pieces or voids that other organizations or that other organizations can't fit. And so when people contribute and donate to the United Way, it's a huge reminder to them how far you guys leverage your finances and how big of an impact they have. So I think I need to open up my checkbook and send you guys some money personally. But great job, and I think it's a great message that tells the community of all the great you're doing.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
So that comes back to a question. If the city of Lacey was to give you some dollars for COVID-19, are you saying you'd only take 5% as an administration fee?
Yeah, that's what we've done, because you've already made an appropriation to this response, and yes, it was 5%.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions? Councilmember Kunkel.
Well, I don't have a question. I would feel honestly more comfortable if the city of Lacey is going to be dispersing funds, that we give them directly to some of these local organizations instead of through the United Way, and thereby saving administrative fees for more of those funds to go directly to those causes. Is that an option we can look at?
Well, in this case, with a 5% administration fee, that's less than what a lot of the other places get. I don't know.
Well,
Scott?
I understand that, but here's the thing. We haven't talked about administration fees from these other organizations that the money gets funneled to, like whether it be homeless backpacks or whether it be Child Action Council, those kinds of things. They also have their fees. So, given the situation where we know our budget is going to be shortfalled here in the coming months, I just think we ought to be a little more cautious.
Understandable. Does anyone else have any other questions? Scott, you have anything to add?
Well, maybe take this opportunity to maybe ask Chris. I mean, If you had to give maybe advice really to the region or even the policymakers, where should those investments go given the fact that we do have limited dollars? And is there a consensus amongst the major providers?
I mean, we're all really having the same conversation. We know that, you know, every nonprofit is going to feel the impacts, right? It's just the facts. Immediately within the first week of this crisis back in early March, senior services had to lay off 70% of their staff. Boys and Girls Clubs had to close, I think, 3 of their clubs and laid off 50% of their staff. So, you know, it's difficult for nonprofits because, you know, people don't want nonprofits to actually spend money to keep their nonprofit open. And so if you have to live poor all the time, then when a crisis hits and you're relied upon to be a first responder in that crisis, you're not in a position to do it, right? So that was the first blow. And the second blow is that most funding for direct service providers is tied to program expense. So if you can't run your programs any longer because people can't gather and you can't get seniors together and you can't get kids together or do whatever it is you're doing in the community, then that funding goes away because it's tied to a program you're not delivering in your community anymore. So that's the second wave of major crisis for nonprofits. We can't make them whole in this crisis. But the biggest priorities have to be is asking ourselves, you know, what is most urgent, right? And in that, like, and by most urgent, it means when does your community begin to collapse? What would it take? If you can't feed your family, if you can't pay your rent, if you can't pay your utilities, if you can't meet your family's basic needs, and that becomes true on a broad scale throughout the community, that's when things start to really fall apart. We're going to have to keep it super, super, super basic like that. And it's going to have to be that way for quite some time. So we can't fund senior services to bring back all of these other programs or to make their budget whole. We can't do that. But what we can do is make sure that when seniors, who are the most vulnerable, as far as we know, to the impacts of this virus, we've got tens and tens of thousands of seniors in our county who are now afraid to go to the grocery store or pick up prescriptions or run errands or maybe don't have transportation options. We got to make sure we're funding programs that are getting to them, right? So we're funding that. We have to make sure that we're funding Meals on Wheels so that their nutrition is attended to, right? When we begin to better understand childcare and what the challenges are going to be, we need to have some plans, some contingency plans in place for how we're going to resource that. Because if you've got parents who can go back to work as we continue through these phases of reopening and can do it safely, they're not going to be able to if we can't pay for childcare. Continuing to be very attentive to the food system throughout the entire county, because what we're seeing now is a lot of people who are experiencing food insecurity that has never been their experience before because they've always worked and they've always been able to meet their basic needs. So we have to look at all the moving parts of the food system and keep our eye on that. You know, Scott, you and I talked a couple of weeks ago when we were really anticipating the supply chain disruption. We got 3 maps we're looking at all the time. One is a map of where the infections are concentrated in the United States and what the coming hotspots are. One is a map of all of the food production, meat production, and agriculture in the United States and where that's concentrated. And one is a map of where all the states are in their reopening and which states have been most aggressive in reopening. And I'll tell you, if you lay those 3 maps on top of each other, where the densest concentration of viruses currently and where the numbers are increasing the fastest and hospitalizations are increasing is in the East and the Midwest. Where our food comes from, our meat and an enormous amount of our agriculture and produce is in the East and the Midwest. And where are the states that are opening very aggressively, where there's not social distancing, where they haven't observed the kind of things that we've observed in Washington, it's in the East and the Midwest. And that's going to directly impact what we experience here in the West. And we, I think, as leaders, need to be anticipating what that could mean 2 weeks down the road, 4 weeks down the road, and how we move ahead of that to mitigate the impacts in our community, right? This is going to be a long, hard road that we're going to travel. And I don't think we can get through it. I know we can get through it. And the way we're going to get through it intact is really by understanding where would the worst pain be. Can't feed my family, can't pay my rent, can't pay my utilities, and that crushing stress and anxiety and fear, because that's where we live now. The more we can mitigate that, the stronger our community is going to be. And that's where we're keeping our priorities.
Do you have another question or comment, Councilmember Kunkel?
No, she answered it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
I do want to say one more thing to the council member about the additional admin fees for the other nonprofits. That's not really how this COVID funding is working. It's very particular. So when we purchased the 30-day food supplies for Catholic Community Services, for the food bank, the Thurston County Food Bank, and for Senior Services of South Sound, they cost all of that out for us. With Catholic Community Services, they now have to, they can't serve a congregate meal. So they're doing these deliveries of packaged meals. So now they have to buy the packaging and the lids and the disposable utensils and things like that. They give us a budget where they cost all of that out. And they say, okay, this is what it costs in a typical year to run the community kitchen program. These are the additional expenses we've incurred. So here's our gap. And we just fund it, buy the stuff. When we were funding the Thurston County Food Bank, they buy food by the semi-trailer truckload, right? And if they're going to get a 30-day supply of food, it was basically, this is what we spend on a tractor trailer full of food. It's $50,000 to fill that, and that would stock our pantries for 30 days if we had this significant disruption and needed food to supplement what we were able to get. So we send him the $50,000 and he purchases the truckload of food that he gets, that sort of thing. So what we're looking at is, in your normal operation, this is what a typical 12-month budget is. And these are the COVID related increases you've seen. And now we have to make sure that that's full so that you can afford to do that. So, his operating expenses, they're going to stay the same for the most part. The only change that there has been in that was that in the food bank's operations, they have, they're volunteer run, and the majority of their volunteer staff were seniors. And when the seniors start sheltering in place, they have to continue to staff their satellite locations. So what we did in that case was call the Olympia Downtown Alliance and ask them to reach out to restaurant owners who had to lay off food service staff. And we redeployed them to the food bank. And so we're funding right now these 4 temporary positions for the food bank to keep them staffed up, using people who were displaced because their businesses were not operating at capacity or closed down and already had their food handling certificates and didn't have, that obstacle to get over. And then Robert hired them, and we're funding them for the duration of this time that he needs additional staff. We did the same thing with Catholic Community Services. So we're going to have to be innovative. We're going to have to keep our eyes on those systems, and we're going to have to anticipate as much as we possibly can what could go wrong, have those contingency plans in place, and continue to prioritize basic needs.
Councilmember Miller?
Yeah, so it sounds like finding all these gaps and knowing how to fill them is like a logistical nightmare almost. And you guys have been doing it for a long time. I've looked at your numbers nationally and locally, and we can applaud you on your numbers because you stay well under your threshold in your administrative expenses. And I don't know, I guess I want to say, number one, good job. And number two, I don't see that you guys overspend. I know a lot of people depend on you. And I also know that that you guys just fill in a lot of the gaps for things that, if we tried to do this ourselves, it would take several full-time employees to find all the gaps that you are already strategically positioned for. So good job, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Councilmember Cox?
Chris, it's no secret that a lot of the social service organizations in this area rely on private fundraising for a good amount of the work they do. And COVID literally wiped out most of the fundraising season. Countless organizations had to cancel their fundraisers probably on into the fall. And so I wondered what the case is with United Way. I know you've had a couple of things, but I don't think they're your like biggest events, are they?
You know, that's for us. I mean, yes, we need to do fundraising in every way we possibly can. I've been attending all of those virtual fundraisers that our local nonprofits have been putting on. In fact, I donate at every single one of them. The Boys and Girls Club had theirs this morning. But you know, we're still learning how that can even be done. And so it's not outside the realm of possibility that United Way will attempt something like that. But it's difficult to pull off. The technology isn't quite there. I don't know. I'm sure you've gone to some of these virtual events yourself. So I don't know yet. But for us as a funder, event-based fundraising is very unreliable. It's very unpredictable. You can set a revenue goal for a fundraising event, but you really don't know if you'll be able to hit it. And then also in a time like this, you know, when, you know, we really expect that pool of philanthropy dollars to be shrinking just based on the economic reaction to the impacts of the virus. We've got to find other creative ways to ensure that we are continuing to be the community responder that we're expected to be. So I'm not sure yet what we'll do in terms of an annual fundraiser. Right now, we're just trying to marshal every resource we can and get them out where they need to be as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Chris. I mainly was just trying to feel for how you all are doing with that part of your business.
We're okay right now. We are really looking at a lot of different options for how we are going to maintain our own operation. I don't know yet. I'll know more in a few more weeks. But we're smart and it's our job to figure these things out.
Very true. Hang in there. Thank you.
You too.
Well, thank you, Chris. Let's keep in touch. And, you know, and I know that the region's also having a conversation about the best way to spend these dollars. And, you know, and there's been some talk about maybe pulling some of our resources, our CARES Act dollars together for United Way. So we'll continue to have those conversations, and let's just keep in touch.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the support that you've already given us and the partnership that we already have, and having me here tonight to talk to you and give you an idea of what we're doing. But we're going to keep doing it for as long as we possibly can.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Do you have anything else, Mr. City Manager?
I do not.
Well, does anyone else have anything for the good of the order? Seeing none, we've reached the end of our agenda. We'll obviously have another council meeting coming up in June. And then hopefully at that council meeting, we can put on the agenda to talk about our committee schedule and report and some whatever, go from there. Maybe even a work session, but we'll talk about that at our next meeting. Until then, I hope everyone can, you know, stay safe, and obviously if you're out in crowd and maintain your social distance, if not, wear a mask. And as always, Lacey, you keep it classy, keep it safe, and I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you.